In the 6th century, the fertile lands around the eastern Mediterranean were ruled by the powerful Byzantine Empire, and the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the east nurtured the Persian civilization. So the deserts of Arabia to the south were home to semi-nomadic tribes, which were most of them were leaderless. So the dry mountain landscape of Hijaz, there was not much to give to life here. So these were situated in the western part of Arabian Peninsula. So in a simple word, as dry and hot land. So in summer, the temperature used to rise well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, this was a harsh landscape, and there was life, signs of life was very difficult. So this Arabian Peninsula covers around an area of over 2 million square kilometers, which is the southern corner of Asia, so which is situated between Europe, Africa and Asia. So this is a very unique land in the olden world, which have connections with all three continents of Africa, Europe and Asia. However, having this position, this land was still ignored by the outsider, because the Egyptians around the area, they expand into the Fertile Crescent and Nubia rather than these deserted lands of Arabia. Even Alexander the Great passed by in the 300 BCE on his way to Persia and India. Even the great Roman Empire attempted to invade the peninsula through Yemen in the 20s BCE, but could not adapt to the harsh landscape, and is failed in the region. But on the other side, if we think about it, this harsh land and is most likely is supposed to be ignored because there is no signs of greenery. There is no life where the tribes herds can graze. So just the monsoon winds, and sometimes they bring seasonal rains, which were just enough for their very small wells. But once the wet season is over and the small valleys and the wadis, they called, to return to their usual dry state, useless as a source of water. So even these small wells and these small pots of water, they collected or accumulated from rain, was only enough for small communities and or the travelers passing through. But we can presume that it was never enough for a full society to be settled here. So civilization of the Arab tend to be greatly shaped, so gradually and greatly shaped by the environments in which they develop. So everything about Arabs' life was based around the harsh environment in which they've been living. So due to the desert's inability to support settled civilization, so the Arabs or them tribes living there were constantly to move in search of fertile land, and so where they can find the grazing land for their flocks. So even one theory of etymology of label states that Arab even mean wandering or nomadic. So no wonder the Arabs were all the time wandering to find a better life for themselves. So the Arab used to spend all the summer months around whatever oases or wells they could rely on year after year, trying to make supplies of water. And after months of enduring the summer heat, they would migrate to the south near Yemen area, where the rain fall in autumn and fertile land appeared to be for their herds. Since the memory of time exists, and the Arab, as it remains in a place, the Bedouin Arabs, Bedouin Arabs who still live in Arabia deserts. So the desert, where there is no sign of life, is hard to live there, and it's a no place to be alone. So therefore, many of them Arabs used to live in community because the community cooperation was essential, relying on the relatives and the community was very, very important for the defense against the famine and the threats of survival for the Arabs, against the heat and the other threats from each other. So the families and tribe were expected to share their resources and shelters, and the concepts of pure individualism or living individually was barely accepted. So for the Arab, the life was a constant struggle against both the humans and the nature. So in a tribal society like this, the expressions become very difficult. The resources and time necessary to complete great sculptures or paintings like the ancient civilization of Egypt and Greece were almost non-existent. Yet the natural human desire to search for beauty could be extinguished by the desert suns. Instead, it took on a new form, language. Perhaps more than any other language in the world, Arabic itself is a form of artistic expression. Word and sentences structure is fluid, creating many different ways for a person to express the idea. The finest poets were revered celebrities in every way due to the wording, their Arabic and their wording. Their words were memorized by the masses and repeated for generations. So when it came to religion, the pre-Islamic Arabs were almost exclusively or mainly used to believe in many gods. Islamic tradition holds that the Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail built the Kaaba in the valley of Mecca in ancient time as a house of worship for one God. So the Kaaba was built as a plain rectangular building on a foundation set by the first man on land from heaven, Adam. From this shrine, Ismail was able to preach the oneness of the God's message to Arabs who adopted him as one of their own. Over the centuries, however, the descendant of the Ismails, they started to keeping distance from his teachings and preachings. Those stones and wood-made idols were their actual God, and even later on they go on to represent separate gods entirely. So by the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were around 360 gods in the Kaaba. The message of Ibrahim and Ismail was not entirely lost on the Arabs. However, the two prophets were still revered figures in the minds of the Arabs, and even some of their basic teaching still held some weight in the society. They certainly believed in the God of Ibrahim and Ismail, called Allah in Arabic, but they believed he was one among many different gods represented by the idols made of wood or stones. So this belief system was far removed from the strict oneness or monotheism, you can say another word, those two prophets had preached, and reflected influence from the Sumerian religion to the north. So isolated Christian and Jewish communities existed within the Arabian Peninsula and also revered the prophets, but that was where their similarities ended. So despite being the very deserted or living in a desert, an isolated place, they were not really isolated from their neighbors. The Romans had become a regional superpower along the northern borders of peninsula in the early decades. So by putting down numerous Jewish revolts in the province of Syria, Palestine, so the Romans stamped their control on the area. So for the Bedouins Arabs, this meant the presence of a wealthy and strong trading partner to the north. So merchants regularly travel these parts of peninsula from Yemen in the south of Syria in the north for trade of goods, and they came from places as far as India and Italy. So the Romans were content to remain in the more hospitable and familiar lands of the Fertile Crescent and let the nomadic Arabs carry on the trade with more distant lands. So to the northeast of Arabia lies the Iranian plateau. The rise of the Sassanid dynasty in Persia in the 200 CE ushered in a century-long struggle between the Romans and Persians, which would have its effects on Arabs. So the border between the two great empires fluctuated, but was generally in the Syrian desert in the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula. To the south of the peninsula was the powerful kingdom of Aksum in Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia. So based high in Abyssinian mountains, Aksum was a powerful trading state that was connected inlandly with African kingdom and Indian Ocean sea routes. As the crossroad for trade, it had considerable influence on Arab merchants who dealt with this in Yemen. So like Rome, Aksum was a Christian empire that had a tension with Persia on numerous occasions. So control of the trade routes running through Yemen was a constant source of friction as both sides sought to turn local leaders into vessels. So in the increasing globalized world of early 600, the Arabs were aware of their neighbors and become affected by events outside the Arabian Peninsula. Being at a crossroad of three powerful states meant being aware of international politics and having to skill to use rivalries to their advantage. So yet, despite their precarious location, the Arabs were safe in the depths of desert. They call their peninsula Jazirat al-Arab, meaning the island of the Arabs, due to how isolated its inhabitants were. So in this protected environment, and movement would rise in early 600, that would have huge implications for the surrounding states and eventually the entire world, it would change the destiny of Arab forever, building on using their unique abilities and doing away with the negative cultural traits that kept them as wandering, warring nomads. So, geography, climate, culture, and politics together all led to the perfect environment in which Islam could rise to become a power in this region very fastly. It would sweep out the desert of Arabia into the battered Roman and Persian empires, conquering territories and assimilating them to create an empire that stretched from Spain to India by the early 1700s, the world's largest at that time. So this exceptional growth in the Arabs of early 600 who were struggling to survive, yet all it took was the arrival of a man who came with a revolutionary message and a promise to the Arabs of a new destiny. So one beyond the sands of Arabia, Muhammad, peace be upon him.